All right. I'd like to welcome all of you to our introductory session of essentials to macro economics. And I would like to believe that all of you or some of you, we are not new in regards to VUT. We are as an institution and the services that we offer. So without wasting much time, let's try to get straight into what we're gathering here for, which is essentials to macroeconomics. So we'll be focusing mainly on the subject of macroeconomics. So my name is Fortune, and I'll be the one that will be facilitating this session. So I believe James would be communicating with you in the background in regards to some of the other stuff relating to other modules as well. So for macroeconomics, I'll be facilitating this one. So in relation to macroeconomics, we are going to be focusing on the macroeconomic side of the subject of economics. We understand that economics is a broader subject, and it is mainly subcategorized into two branches. We have microeconomics, which some of you were doing last semester, and we have macroeconomics, which we'll be doing this particular semester. So all of these are complementary in their approach. So the umbrella term would be economics. So for macroeconomics, we are going to be looking at the study guide that is made up of 9 units, which we are expected to be covering them in full before getting to our exams. And in between, you'd also be having your KCQs, which are your knowledge check questions, which are also going to be examining you on various aspects in relation to the subject is concerned. So for the sessions that we're going to be conducting, for those that are going to be joining us when we start the paid class, we are going to look at all of the sections that are within the study guide, as well as we're also going to be having a revision class session as well that would also augment what we'll be looking at within the sessions. All right, so these are the topics that we are going to be focusing on. There is the introductory topic, which is Introduction to Macroeconomics, where you are introduced to the subject of macroeconomics, how it differs from microeconomics, the approach that you're going to be taking in this particular module. We're also going to be looking at that, where you are going to be differentiating between microeconomics and macroeconomics, and also the approach that you're also going to be using, the language that you're also going to be using when it comes to macroeconomics. So there's a vast difference, which we're going to be talking about between micro and macroeconomics, which we're also going to be appreciating in terms of some of the other topics are concerned, where you'll be having measuring the performance of the economy, which is your unit number 2, which tries to look at how then, after defining what an economy is from a macroeconomic perspective, how then do you measure how that economy is performing. Then we have various sectors that are formed as a result of the interaction of the participants within that particular market. We have the monetary sector or the public sector, which is your unit 3 and 4. Then also augmenting theories, which are your macroeconomic theories that are going to be forming the bedrock of the reasoning behind macroeconomics. Then we also have subjects like inflation, unemployment, which are also in them macroeconomic objectives that a nation seeks to achieve and how they affect an economy. Then we have economic growth and development, which is also a macroeconomic objective on its own, and the developmental aspect of it, how growth is supposed to be inclusive, when we look at the various sources of economic growth, etc. Then we also have the foreign sector, which is an important sector which contributes to the performance of an economy, which tries to look at how an economy relates with the international economy. All right. So these are the major topics that we are going to be looking at. We're going to be zooming in, and at the end of these topics, we're expected to be answering an exam type scenario, which is made up of multi-check questions. This one is the one that was written the last semester on the 14th of November 2025, which is made up of 25 multiple choice questions, which you'll be expected to be answering within that particular regard. So for today, after the presentation, we're just going to look at some of the questions to just have a few of the questions that you're likely going to be facing within an exam type scenario. All right, so I don't know if anyone has any question regarding what I've said. There's also the prescribed textbook, which I believe some of you have access. If you do not, we're going to be giving you these elements. So I don't know from what I've just, before we get onto the topic of today, from what I've just mentioned, if anyone has any question, feel free to ask. If any question arises, feel free to raise your hand or to unmute yourself and say something. If anyone has any question. All right. So for today, we want to look at the broader term, which is defining an economy. So since we've talked about the differences between macro and microeconomics, we need to also appreciate what we're going to be looking at in the greater picture of what we're looking at. So the subject is the subject of economics. What are we talking about when we are talking about an economy? So an understanding of an economy gives us a broader understanding of what we are dealing with in terms of the scope of the subject in itself and the various approaches that you can then use in terms of understanding an economy. So I believe for those that were doing microeconomics, for those that were in the last semester class, you were introduced to what was referred to as microeconomics, which is a branch or a sub-branch of broader term economics. And within that particular branch, you were looking at individual elements within a particular market. So when you're approaching the subject of demand, you'll be looking at it from an individual demand perspective. It is supply. You're looking at the individual demand that you're getting within a particular market or a particular household. So you'll be looking at it from an individualistic perspective. So in that particular regard, you'd understand that when you're looking at microeconomics, you're looking at the individual elements that form what would then, if we are to aggregate it, would then become an economy. So it starts from an individual perspective. And when you aggregate that, that is when you collect all of those demands from all of the individual households and the demands from the individual industries, you then get what we refer to as aggregated demand, which is a broader term of demand, which is different from individual demand or individual market demand. So the same applies with other terms like supply, where you're looking at supply within a particular industry or a particular sector. If it is agricultural market or if it is supply of an individual product, it was individualistic. So now when you're talking about supply from a macroeconomics perspective, it is now on a broader perspective. So I believe you can see my screen. Can I just get a confirmation if you are able to see what I am projecting on the screen?
Yes, we can see.
All right, thank you. So what you're looking at on your screen is what is referred to as a circular flow of income and spending. So this circular flow of income and spending is the starting point that we look at when you're trying to define an economy. What is it that you're trying to define as an economy? There has to be a relationship between participants. There has to be participants in the first place. So who are these participants? We have to define the participants that we find within an economy. So within that, you find that in any economy, there are two main participants, which is referred to as a simple macroeconomic model. So when you have two main participants, okay, can you maximize your screen, please? All right, let me just increase the size of my screen. All right, so I'll try to do it in such a way that it doesn't cut off. I hope this is now visible. You can just give a confirmation if it is visible in the chat. All right. So, all right, thank you. So when you're looking at an economy, you're looking at the interaction between the main participants within an economy. And who are these participants that we have within an economy? The participants that you have two main participants, that is the firms and the households. So these are the two main entities that we have, and their interaction, that is the relationship between these two entities, is what then forms an economy. And in the process, as they interact, markets then gets formed, which are going to be explaining how that happens. But before we get into that, let's get to an understanding of who are the households and who are the firms. And as we're trying to define these particular elements within the market, we also need to understand what is it that motivates these particular individuals into making decisions or economic decisions within a particular market. So the first element that you have is the households. The households are the general individuals that you have within a particular market, and they represent what you refer to as the owners of the factors of production. So I believe within your microeconomics, you're introduced to some of these terms as well. Factors of production, where we have four main factors of production. That is your labor, your capital, your natural resources, as well as your entrepreneurship or enterprising skills. So these particular factors of production are owned by the households, and they're the ones that make decisions in terms of distribution of these particular factors of production. On the other hand, we have what we refer to as the firms or the entities. And these firms or the entities make use of the factors of production in order to provide the goods and services that are required by these particular households. So these households require a vast amount of needs and wants that they desire. They desire to have shelter. They desire to have their basic needs. They desire to have security. They desire to have their self-esteem needs. That is, if some of you know what we refer to as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So they have the hierarchy of needs that they require to be fulfilled as a result of that. So the firms are there to ensure that all of these needs are taken care of. And as a result of that, they would need to take advantage of the same factors of production that these households have in order for them to produce the needs and wants, which we refer to as goods and services, that these particular households require. And in the process, you can see that markets then gets formed as a result of that. In order for firms to have access to the factors of production, they need to get into what we refer to as a factor market. So within that particular market, you'll be having elements like your pricing, your normal pricing that you learned in your microeconomics, the forces of demand and supply, in existential, determining what prices to be paid for each factor of production, etc. Then it then creates access to the factors of production. And as the firms are supplying the goods and services, they are supplying the goods and services in the goods market is then formed as a result of that. And in the process, also the same factors of production, the same forces, market forces are also in existential in order to enable elements like pricing, etc., to exist within this particular market. So in terms of what motivates the firms, so in terms of the motivation of the firms are mainly driven by what we refer to as profit maximization. So these entities are mainly driven by profit maximization. So they would want to maximize profit. So how do you maximize profit as an individual? Profits are maximized by increasing your revenue and minimizing your costs. So if you want to maximize the profits, they would want to increase the revenue and minimize the cost. So that means that in that particular regard, they would need to increase how much they're going to be selling these particular goods and services and minimize the costs of production that they are using in order to produce the same goods and services. So you can see there that there is a sort of like a trade-off or a conflict between what the households want and what the firms want. These households would want to utilize to satisfy their needs and wants, to have their um, um, desires and wants satisfied, and they would want to have that at a very low cost. So they, according to the law of demand, more is demanded as the price is reducing, and as the price is increasing, less is demanded. So that means that households would want to acquire the goods and services at a very low price in such a way that they can maximize their utility, they can maximize their satisfaction. So you can see that there's a divergent view in terms of how the households and how the firms would want to approach when it comes to the market. So as a result of that, that creates a situation which we refer to as a market failure. So we're going to be talking about market failures later on when we talk about the public sector, why we introduce the government. You can see that in the middle there's a government. So there's a government that then gets formed as a result of the market failures that exists due to the deficiencies of the views that these two participants have. So the firms wants to maximize the profits, the households wants to minimize how much they are going to be paying and also maximizing their utility. So as a result of that, you'd find out that firms would only concentrate on those goods and services that are profitable, and they would rather ignore those aspects of the market that are less profitable. And sometimes those less profitable aspects are essential for the long-term existential of these particular households. For instance, if you talk about if you have to talk about healthcare, at some instances you'd find out that if healthcare is highly priced, it means that the average household would not be able to have access to healthcare because they are receiving less wages that are coming from the firms that are paying low because they want to maximize the profits. If you look at elements like education, education is pivotal when it comes to the emancipation of a society. And as a result of that, in some instances, you'd find out that it can be highly priced or underproduced because of the less lucrative nature that it might be having in relation to the particular society that it has. So as a result of that, you'd find out that that creates market failures where certain sectors of the economy are underproduced and certain sectors of the economy are ignored, and certain drawbacks that come as a result of producing the goods and services, for instance, pollution, etc., and all of these land degradation might be ignored in the process of producing these goods and services. So hence, as a result, you need to have an entity that governs how this operation takes place and also that supplements the production of goods and services that are not produced by the firms themselves. So that's where the government now comes into play. So the government comes into play in order to ensure that there is a certain predetermined standard that is set in terms of how these particular firms interact with these households and what is to be produced. And it provides also what we refer to as the rule of law, elements like the rule of law, where you have various sectors within the government institutions that are mandated to enforce laws and regulations within that particular economy as well. So the provision of national security, national defense, etc., and all of these particular important aspects of an economy. So that is where the government now comes into play, where the government now needs to play an active role in an economy in order to produce those goods that are not produced by the private sector in sufficient quantities, and also regulating the pricings, the wage structures. We're going to be talking about that, where they set minimum wages, price laws, etc., where they also introduce laws on what is to be produced, what quantities is supposed to be produced, and also penalizing the production of harmful substances. For instance, imposing sugar tax on sugar production, which is harmful, obviously, to the health of individuals, imposing sin tax to the consumption of alcohol, the consumption of cigarettes, which are also harmful to the society, as well, minimizing elements like drugs, the production of drugs. Sometimes they are profitable, and you would need the government to enforce certain laws in order to minimize such elements. And also ensuring that it produces in larger quantities or sufficient quantities elements like education, where the government plays an active role in provision of education, provision of healthcare, provision of national security, Ministry of Justice, correctional services, etc., in order to ensure that you have a balanced economy. So their interaction, as they're interacting, the government would also need to have some form of revenue elements. How is it going to be raising the revenue in order for it to produce these goods and services? That is where taxes are introduced. That's why you see taxation there coming from the households going to the government and also coming from the firms going to the government as well. So taxes become the main revenue earner for the government in order for it to redistribute those particular resources within the markets in sufficient quantities. So our understanding of this gives us, in a nutshell, what we're talking about when we're talking about an economy. When you're trying to define an economy, it is defined by these interactions that you see here on this particular screen. So how does these interactions then get appraised? How then do you look at whether the economy is performing very well, whether the economy is not performing very well when you have systems like these in place, when you have the government, when you have the firms, when you have the markets? How then do you assess whether an economy is performing very well, whether an economy is underperforming? So you need to... Is that a question? Okay, let me just mute.
Lindy,
All right.
please mute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I've just muted. So if you happen to have any question, feel free to raise your hand and ask any particular question as we are proceeding. All right. So as a result of that, you would have these you'd need to have a way of measuring these interactions, how the economy is performing. And as a result, you would need to have what we refer to as macroeconomic objectives. That is where your unit number 2 is going to come. So we're going to be looking at, so these are the various, we've talked about these, the various elements within an economy. We're going to be looking at them one by one later on. And now we need to get an understanding of the macroeconomic objectives. So these are the factors of production. We have natural resources of land, we have labor, we have capital, we have entrepreneurship. So now we need to look at measuring the performance of an economy. So when you're looking at measuring the performance of an economy, you would want to have an understanding of how do we measure the performance of an economy. What are the key metrics? What are the key performance indicators? In some modules, we call them key performance indicators. So these are key performance indicators of an economy. What is it that you're going to be using when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy? So when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy, we have 5 measures or 5 macroeconomic objectives that are used to measure the performance of an economy. The first one is, first of all, what we refer to as economic growth. Then secondly, we have what we refer to as price stability. Then thirdly, we have what we refer to as full employment. Then fourthly, we have what we refer to as external stability. Then last, we have what we refer to as equitable distribution of income and wealth. So these are the main macroeconomic objectives or measures that are used to assess whether an economy is performing very well. And we're going to be looking at them one by one so that we get an understanding of these particular objectives. So as we are approaching these objectives as well, they also act as a highlight or a summary, what we're going to be looking at throughout the rest of the module. So if you look at economic growth, you're looking at how much production is taking place within an economy. And as a result of that, you would need to have what we refer to as a proxy that you then use to follow whether the economy is growing or if the economy is not growing. So by definition, economic growth is defined as the sustained increase in the economy's productive capacity. So when you're talking about the sustained increase in the productive capacity, how do we measure a country's productive capacity? So if you want to measure the production that is taking place within an economy, you make use of a metric that is referred to as gross domestic product. Gross domestic product. So gross domestic product is representative of the market value of the production that is taking place within the geographical boundaries of a particular nation. So, for instance, if you'd want to assess how much production was made in South Africa, you would have to look at the gross domestic product statistics in order for you to understand the value that South Africa has produced in 2025, in 2024, and all of these other years. So, as a result of that, you'd have the gross domestic product as the key metric that is used to assess economic growth. And as a result of that, we have the formula for calculating economic growth rate. It is calculated as the current year's GDP minus the previous year's GDP divided by the previous year's GDP times 100. Then you get a percentage. That percentage that you get there becomes either the growth of the economy or the shrinking of that particular economy, depending with whether the gross domestic product has been increasing or not. So the key question is, why is it important for an economy to grow? Let me just pose this as a question. Let me hear your thoughts. Why is it important for an economy to grow? Is it not just enough to produce the same amount of goods and services that we produced in the previous year? Why do we need to have an increase in the gross domestic product from time to time? This is just a question. Why do we need economic growth? Let me hear your thoughts. Feel free. Feel free to say something. So in economics, it is a subject of expressing your ideas, what you're thinking when you're given a particular scenario. So we have positive statements, we have normative statements. So it can be backed by facts, or it can be a statement of what you're
Yes,
just generally. Yes, yes.
yes. I think gross domestic product it's supposed to grow because we need to maintain the population. Because the more the population is growing, we need to create jobs. We need to distribute food, something like that.
That's a very good answer. That's a very, very good answer. Anyone else?
Yes, and just to add on that, it also helps with better incomes for different companies. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's also a very good answer. Anyone
So that
else?
means we also need to grow agriculture as well, and small businesses, so that we'll able to maintain the population.
That's also a very all of
Increase
the answers
how to increase job availability.
to increase jobs. Yes, yes, that's also a very good answer as well.
Okay, I also think it is to reduce poverty, also just reducing that gap between poor and the rich.
A very good answer. Very good. So all of the answers that you've given.
Fortunate, I think also it also attract investors to come to invest in the country, because if the economy is growing, obviously most companies want to come and invest in the country. Thereby, then we have got a better chance also of borrowing money even from IMF, because our economy is stable.
Yeah, that's also good. All right. So thank you for all of the contributions that you gave, and they were spot on. So for the growth of the economy, the first one talked about population, that you're having an increase in the population. So in order for you to accommodate the increase in the population, you also need to have a growth in the cake size. So obviously, when you're having an increase in the number of individuals that you have, without the growth of the economy, you're likely going to soon find out you'll be having a problem with unemployment because of that. So if the economy is not growing as much as the population growth, that creates a problem, a long-term problem in the future, because in the long term, you'd realize that resources are no longer enough, and you're now competing for the little that is available within an economy as a result of that. So that is number one element. Then secondly, someone talked about it is important to grow an economy in order to increase incomes of individuals. So obviously, in order to improve the standards of living of the individuals that are currently there or that are going to be there in the future, you need to have an increase in the gross domestic product, because it will trickle down to how much income those individuals would get at the end of the day. So the better the growth, the better the incomes that they are likely going to be receiving as well. And some of you talked about investments as well. It attracts investments. That is also true, because if you want to make a case in terms of borrowing from other financial institutions, international financial institutions, for various activities, they look at the growth statistics of that particular nation, and that also reflects in terms of how attractive it is as an investment destination. So we've talked about the distribution of income and wealth, reduction of poverty. That is also true. The greater the growth of the economy, it means that the standard of living of an average citizen is likely going to increase as a result of that. So you'd see that most of what we refer to as first world countries, these are countries that have been able to grow their economy at a much faster rate than their population growth rates. So as a result, they've been able to cater for all of their average citizens, and hence, as a result, the average lifestyle that an average citizen has in the first world economies as compared to the third world economies is different due to how they've been growing their economies over time. So that is why economic growth becomes imperatively important, because at the end of the day, what you are going to create comes from the growth of the economy. If you are not going to grow an economy, it means you're likely going to compete for less resources, and as a result, creating issues within an economy. Yes, Xiaomi, I see your hand is up.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask, when we are talking about gross domestic product, we are talking about all the products we produce within the country.
Yes, yes. So gross domestic product is the market value or the goods and services that are produced within the boundaries of a country. So that means within South Africa, regardless of who is producing it, as long as it is production and it is within the formal market, we calculate that as gross domestic product. We are going to zoom in into gross domestic product later on as we get into the various methods that are used to measure gross domestic product. Yes, I don't know whether that was your legacy hand or...
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Okay, so as a result of that, you need to have the growth in the economy, and we said that it is calculated as the current year's GDP minus the previous year's GDP divided by the previous year's GDP by 100. So suppose you're given a scenario here that you have that if GDP in 2024 was 2.1 trillion, and in 2023 it was 2.4 trillion, then the economic growth rate is, I was supposed to hide these figures here, but anyway, you can see them. I think for the sake of time, let's just get a rundown of them. So you'd want to measure how much growth has taken place between 2024 and 2023. You simply take the current year statistics minus previous year statistic divided by the previous year statistic, multiply that by 100, then you get a percentage. That particular percentage is indicative of the growth of an economy. So as a result of that, you can see the growth that would have taken place within that particular economy. So in terms of these statistics, they differ from time to time. There's the global rate, which measures the global economic growth rate, which measures the sum total of the global economy, and it is the individual countries' growth rates, where you look at South Africa, how much South Africa has been growing, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mozambique, all of these sub-Saharan countries, European countries as well. So this is how the economic growth rate is calculated. So you might get an exam type question that gives you particular statistic, and you're supposed to calculate gross domestic product. This is how you calculate. So this is a very examinable element. Let me just highlight it. Whilst you're still here, you can be examined on the growth rate. You can be given statistic, and you're supposed to be calculating those particular statistics, how much an economy is growing. So for maybe your further research and whatever that you might want to do, recreational reading or recreational research, most of these statistics, you get them first at either the South African Reserve Bank website or Stats SA, which you can get these particular statistics. So if you want to see if South Africa has been increasing over time or it has been decreasing over time, you can just check on those particular websites. Then secondly, we have price stability. So with price stability, we understand the importance of prices within a particular nation. So the prices reflect how much you can acquire a particular good or service within the goods market. So the price stability is very, very important because, okay, let me just pose the question. Why is the price stability important within a particular nation? Let me pose it as a question. Why is the price stability important? Do we really need to have price stability in any economy? If yes, why? If no, why? Is it really important for us to have stable prices?
Okay, I'm gonna take a chance and say because it's yes, we should have price stability. Also because it just affects the price of living, the cost of living. If the inflation is too high, then the basics, people won't be able to afford the basics like bread because they become too expensive.
That's spot on. You've talked about a key thing, cost of living. Cost of living. It means that when a person is living, there's a cost attached to that, whether whether they decide to wake up sleeping the whole day or there's a cost that is attached to a person being alive. So the cost of living obviously means an individual consumes, regardless of whether they decide to produce or not. So as a result of that, it means that you'd need to have a low cost of living or an affordable cost of living for an average citizen so that they can have access to the basics. So the basics that enables an individual to survive, an individual to continue to exist as a going concern. All right. So as a result of that, you'd need to have a situation from an economics perspective, you'd need to have a situation where prices are stable, where there is long-term sustainability of an economy. So when prices are stable, it is an indicator of the stability of an economy, how sustainable it is to plan within that particular economy. Are you able to serve within that particular economy? And are you going to have to retain the same value if you decide to serve, let's say, for 10 years of your particular currency, of whatever it is that you are saving on? So it becomes important because it has an influence on all of the economic objectives. If you are to look at economic growth, it is affected by price stability. If you are to look at full employment, it is also affected by price stability. Distribution of income itself, it is affected by price stability. If prices are not stable, if individuals are to save, let's say you are saving 10,000 Rand in your bank account from 2010 and you didn't even touch it up until 2025, will you still have the same value? So if prices are stable, it should be able to purchase the same amount of goods and services that it was able to purchase from that particular time up until now. So if the scenario is, however, it means that you're likely going to lose value or to lose the purchasing ability as a result of that. So it becomes imperatively important for that to happen because if you are to look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, now we're talking about firms that are planning for the long term. They want to exist as a going concern in the next 20 to 25 years, 30 years. So they would want to have these strategic plans, tactical plans that they have. And their planning is also influenced by price stability because how much they're going to be spending, how much is the return on investment going to be. affected by inflation as a result of that. So as I'm talking about now, I've introduced a very important term, which is inflation. So when you're talking about inflation, inflation is defined as a sustained increase in the general price level of an economy. So when you have a sustained increase in the general price level, we've also introduced another term as well, which is referred to as the general price level. So when you're talking about inflation, you're not talking about the increase of the price of one particular product. We're talking about the general price level. So that means that when you're talking about the general price level, we need to also have an understanding of what we're referring to as the general price level. So the general price level is defined as or is measured using a key indicator, which is referred to as the consumer price index, given an abbreviation CPI. So this CPI is the one that tracks what we refer to as a representative basket of goods and services. So they select a representative basket of goods and services in South Africa that is required for an average citizen to have access to in order for them to live a decent standard of living. So this basket of goods and services can be made up of maybe particular staple foods, it can be made up of data, it can be made up of electricity pricing, it can be made up of fuel costs, etc. So they give various weightings in terms of the importance that each particular product has within this particular basket of goods and services, and they then track the movement in terms of the prices. Then at the end of the day, they get what they refer to as the consumer price index. So for the purpose of this module, you're not going to get into the CPI itself, how CPI is calculated, it is not required, but you're going to be using the CPI itself to calculate the rate of inflation. So the CPI, the statistic that you'd have calculated from the explanations that I've just given, you take the current year's CPI minus the previous year's CPI divided by the previous year's CPI times 100, then you get what you refer to as the inflation rate. So this inflation rate is very, very important because it is indicative of cost of living within that particular economy. Whether the cost of living is increasing, you'd have a positive inflation rate that is increasing beyond a certain degree. So in South Africa, it is usually given as a target between 3 to 6%. But recently I saw an article that stated that they were about to abolish this 3 to 6% target. I think they changed it to, was it a 4% target, 4.5% target, to move away from this 3 to 6%. So I'll check on the latest statistic of how the Reserve Bank is now measuring this inflation rate. So these targets would then indicate the response that the central bank, when we're talking about the central bank, which has a mandate of ensuring price stability within a nation, when we talk about the monetary sector. So the response that the central bank has on an economy in terms of interest rates comes from whether the inflation rate is within this particular range or not. So they would then introduce various policies in order to influence the inflation rate within this particular economy. So now what we need to be worried of is how important or what weight should we give price stability to. So we have various case studies that occurred in the realm of economics over time. Number one, we have Zimbabwe 2008, where we had the monthly inflation rate peaking at 79.6 billion %, where prices were doubling over 24 hours. So the price that you'd see today, tomorrow, you find it doubled up. If you go to look for bread today, potentially costing, let's say in rand terms, costing 15 rand. When you get back tomorrow, you want to buy the same bread, it's now costing 60 rand. And when you want to do the same thing again the day after tomorrow, it's now costing 500 rand. So that was the kind of a scenario. It sounds like unrealistic, but that was the scenario that was happening in this particular country, where inflation rates were increasing at exorbitant percentage points beyond comprehension, where the currency lost all of its value. They ended up having billions of dollars as base billions of rand of some dollars as the best that they were using in terms of exchanging goods and services. Then you also have countries like Germany that also had increases that you would have prices doubling up in 3 to 7 days, etc. So as a result of that, you'd find out that there wasn't enough economic activity taking place. You would have savings wiped out. You would have individuals losing all of their retirement funds just in the twinkling of an eye like that. So as a result of that, that would then lead to the regression of an economy where the economy, instead of it progressing, it regresses, it moves backwards, it shrinks. And that is where you have unemployment peaking because firms would not be able to pop up and closures, etc. It's basically a disaster. So inflation is regarded as the number one public enemy of any economy. So the number one enemy of any economy is inflation. So they have to look at inflation very, very closely and to monitor it to ensure that it is maintained delicately in such a way that the economy is. So what is the cause of hyperinflation? So that's a very, very good question. So that's a very, very good question. So the cause of hyperinflation, so we're going to be zooming this one deeply on unit number 6 when we look at the subject of inflation in itself. Okay. Was that someone talking? All right. So when you look at the subject of inflation very closely, we are going to be looking at some of the causes of inflation. So inflation comes from a different perspective, if you have to look at it. So there is the triggering phase of an inflation. There is the sustaining phase of an inflation. There is the propagating phases of an inflation. Then there are supporting factors of an inflation. So we're going to be looking at some of these particular factors that causes hyperinflation within an economy. First, what happens within an economy is the loss of confidence within that particular economy. And when there's a loss of confidence within that particular economy, these are some of the conditions that enables inflation to thrive very much deeply. So when there's no confidence within the economy, you'd have situations like bank runs, individuals running to the banking institutions to withdraw any amount of money that they have within that particular institution in order for them to enter into the speculative market where they are buying and selling currencies in order to preserve the value. So as a result of that, you find out that as a result of that creates a situation where whenever prices are to be changed or to be indexed, you'd find a situation where some of the producers of the goods and services creating what we refer to as artificial shortages. So artificial shortages is a situation where they hold back certain production or they actually do not produce in order to influence the price increases. So remember the law of supply, which says that more is supplied at a higher price. So they want to maximize on that. So as a result of that, you'd find out that they limit the amount of supply, and as a result of that, in itself, it leads to the increases in the prices. So propagated on top of that, you have speculative tendencies that are also occurring within an economy where individuals are trading currencies as a result of that. So when you're trading currencies, you'd want to ensure that you have access to a certain particular currency. So that creates also a depreciative aspect on that particular currency where it quickly depreciates because of the demand that is there on that particular currency. So you'd want to purchase, for instance, individuals in Zimbabwe wanted to have access to US dollars. They wanted to dump the Zim dollar. So in the process of dumping the Zim dollar for the US dollar, the price of the Zim dollar depreciated. So that means that within the currency market, again, there's also a push factor in that particular regard. You also have production coming there. And as a result of that, the government itself would also be in the process of trying to preserve the economy, and they are paying wages. And in order for them to do so, they are also bankrupt. They would print money that would also exacerbate the problem. So you'd have them introducing new currencies from time to time, printing money in the process to pay off debts and to manage there are wage bills as a result of that. So you'd have hyperinflation, an economy that is on a runaway. So that creates hyperinflation. So you'd have all of these factors coming into play. All right. I don't know if anyone has any question regarding price stability. All right. So let's move on to the third element, which is full employment. So full employment tries to follow the use of the natural resources or the factors of production. We say factors of production. So the utilization of factors of production is tracked by a metric that we refer to as full employment, but of particular importance, or the one that we give greater weighting when it comes to full employment, is the labor resource. So the labor resource is very, very important because it indicates what percentage of the population do we have that has access to employment. So the population is a very, very important aspect of the economy because the population determines the standard of living. That is the reason why we have an economy in the first place. So if the population is not having any access to employment, it means they do not have any access to income. And when they do not have any access to income, what problems then gets created as a result of that? You have social problems that comes from that. You have economic problems, standards of living, less access to healthcare. And we are talking about less access to healthcare. You're now talking about potentially creating epidemics and pandemics because people do not have access to health itself. So when they do not have access to health, you are likely going to have outbreaks of diseases because people do not have access to clean water, clean food. You're likely going to have typhoid, dysentery, and all of these outbreaks when people get sick with simple things like flu. It can become an outbreak if it is not treated and if people do not have access to medication. So you'd have outbreaks coming from that. And also from a social perspective, social ills, as people become desperate, that becomes a very volatile society, a very inflammable society because people are always angry. Individuals would find themselves turning to drugs, turning to prostitution, turning to elements that are not going to be emancipating the social welfare of that particular society. So as a result, you would have high crime rates, robberies and things like that, existential within a society because there isn't enough amount of income that is being created as a result of that. So it becomes important for policymakers to track this particular statistic and then obviously try to look at some of the prescriptions in terms of how to solve full employment. So we're going to be zooming much more deep when you're looking at unemployment as a topic. When it's on unit number, I think unit number, is it number 7 or so after inflation. So unemployment rate in South Africa, I think currently is at the official 32.9% as of 2024. The 2025 statistics, I haven't checked if they have been published or not. So that is indicative of a situation where you have close to, from a broader perspective, I think is at 40%, close to 40% of the population unemployed, of the active population unemployed. So that means that of the individuals that are active, economically active, 40% of them do not have access to employment. So that is a situation that is not good for any economy because it creates a host of problems that I've already mentioned, and it exacerbates some of these issues that South Africa is already fighting against, which is not a good thing. So unemployment rate is calculated as the number of employed individuals divided by what we refer to as the labor force. So the labor force is made up of both the unemployed individuals plus the employed individuals. So in terms of that, you would have a calculation of the unemployment rate. So for international comparison, in Germany, they have a 3% unemployment rate. The United States have a 3.6%, Nigeria 33.3%. The global average is 5.8% in terms of the unemployment. So this is as at 2024. So you can then see the difference between the first world economies with some of the African economies that we have. All right, so I don't know if anyone has any question regarding unemployment, full employment. All right, so then we also have what we refer to as external stability. So with external stability, you're trying to look at how an economy performs with the international. Okay, so I saw a question that I did not answer. Let me just answer it here. Our circular flow, is it only focusing on the closed economy? Yes. So the one that we introduced earlier on was focusing on a closed economy. So now I have to answer this as we are approaching external stability. So a closed economy is one that you're looking at, which you refer to as a two-sector model or the domestic economy, which you do not look at the external economy. So now when you introduce the external economy, you now look at what we are referring to as international trade. So the international trade perspective is an auxiliary of the local economy, because we understand that from a local perspective, there are certain goods and services, there are certain resources that we do not have access to that are produced by other economies. So if you look at the circular flow that we had earlier on, the natural resources that South Africa has, there are certain resources that South Africa has that other countries do not have access to or are not naturally endowed to, that they would want to have access to. So what necessitates that, or what facilitates the exchange of these resources that we require in South Africa and we do not have them, and that other countries require and that South Africa holds? For instance, South Africa does not produce crude oil. The oil is produced by other countries, mainly the Gulf states, them, and some of the countries across the globe. So as a result of that, crude oil is a very, very important resource. We understand the importance of crude oil. It is the one behind fuel prices. It is the one behind so many important elements of the economy. So as a result of that, you would need to have access to these resources that you do not have access to, because you'd want to ensure that your transport system is existential and is operating smoothly. You are also producing electricity with some of the diesel that gets then burnt as a result of that. So as a result, you would need to have trade. So that is where the aspect of external stability comes into play. So external stability comes from trade. So when you're talking about trade, we're talking about the exchange between countries, a local economy with another economy. So how much South Africa is selling to another country and how much it is importing from that particular country. So we're introduced to two main aspects of trade, which is exports and imports, which are pivotal when it comes to that. So the differences between how much exports a country is making and how much it is importing is generally regarded as the balance of trade or balance of payments. So the difference between an export and an import receipt is what you're referring to as the balance of payments. So as a result of that, when you have a situation where exports are more than imports, you have what you refer to as a balance of payment surplus. And when you have imports being greater than exports, you have a situation where there is a deficit within the particular economy. And a deficit obviously is not something that is good. So when we get to the measuring of gross domestic product, you would understand that when you're measuring gross domestic product, imports are a negative addition and exports are a positive addition, which means that when you are importing, you are reducing the size of the economy or you are causing a leakage on the economy. And when you're exporting, you are adding to the economy as a result of that. So you would have situations where in some instances you have a negative trade balance, which is a deficit with some other countries. So these were some of the justifications that the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, was using when he was imposing tariffs on other countries, mainly because they were having trade deficits with other countries. And as a result, they were seeing that they were not benefiting from some of these trade agreements with other countries. So when you impose tariffs, obviously you'd want to pivot the situation to your advantage. So as a result of that, you'd want to have a situation where you are exporting to other countries and you're having dominance in other countries in as much as you are having these particular agreements. So why is it important for us to have external stability? It is important because it is an indicator of the economic competitiveness, global economic competitiveness of the local economy in the international market. So if you want to see how much South Africa is competitive internationally, you look at the balance of payments or the external stability that it has within that particular economy. It also has an influence on the value of that particular currency. If you'd want to look at whether the South African rand is appreciating or depreciating, is also influenced from these particular elements that are beyond speculative. All right, then lastly, we have equitable distribution of income and wealth. So we talked about the situation where when individuals are producing within a particular economy, in some instances, it creates inequalities due to the free market systems where demand and supply, in some instances, does not afford a perfect distribution of income and wealth. So in such a situation, you'd want to have a situation where there is fair allocation of income and wealth across all population groups in South Africa. So in an economy. So just to put it into perspective, the equitable distribution of income and wealth is measured by a proxy referred to as a Gini coefficient. That is a measure that measures inequality between 0 and 1, with 0 indicating perfect equality, then with 1 representing perfect inequality. So that means the higher the statistic towards 1, remember it's between 0 and 1, it's a decimal. So as it moves towards 1, it means it's moving towards perfect inequality, which is the red zone, which is what you do not want, because it is indicating that much of the societies of the economy's resources or wealth are held by only 10% of the population, or less than 10% of the population. So as a result of that, countries are ranked differently on the Gini coefficient map, with countries, I think Canada is the best distribution, which is at a Gini coefficient of 0.33 in the world. And South Africa has the worst inequality. I'm sure you've seen these particular statistics being talked about in the news from time to time. So we're about to close. I just want to conclude, just allow me to conclude here. From time to time, indicating the worst inequality in the world. So this creates certain key questions on how some of these elements should be addressed, and what is the reason behind this income inequality. So in closing, this is our last point. I would want to hear what you think about the income inequality in South Africa, and what do you think should be the solution of income inequality in South Africa? South Africa has the worst inequality in the world, with a Gini coefficient of 0.63. How can we solve this income inequality in South Africa? It means there's a wide gap between income brackets. What do you think can be the solution to income inequality in South Africa? All right, so let me just give this as a homework because of time. Let's just get to a closing. I see we have 5 minutes up. Our time, job creation. Okay, so I see some of the answers are trickling in: job creation, etc., education, and etc. So we're going to start our discussion in the next session from this particular point of income distribution. How do we solve income distribution in South Africa? Is there no job creation? Is there no education in South Africa currently, etc.? Skills assessment, is there no skills assessment currently in South Africa? And all of those kinds of things. All right, thank you very much for attending today's session. So these are some of the elements I would have wanted to go through 1 or 2 questions within this particular question, but I think we can look at it in the next session, which is part of what we've covered today, but because of time, let's leave it for the next session. All right. Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone has any question or anything that they would want to say before we close. All right. Thank you very much. I think that's all from my side. Until we meet again, have a pleasant week ahead of you.
Please don't forget to send us the recording and the notes.
Oh, okay, okay. All right, okay. Perfect. You get the recording, you also get the notes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. We'll see you
Welcome.
next week.
Thank you. See you next week. Goodbye.